The dinner was still unfinished when Claire Whitfield, head nurse at Hamilton Hospital in Dalton, Georgia, vanished on a summer evening in 1989. Her silver Caprice was found hours later, door open, keys in the ignition, headlights still on in the woods of Rocky Face Ridge. In her small house, the kitchen light was still on, a glass of water still sweating, and the phone rang unanswered. The police believed it was just a failed robbery until conflicting evidence and a mysterious bite mark on the body shattered every hypothesis. 36 years later, as DNA technology reopened the door to the past, the case would reveal a truth no one, not even law enforcement, could have imagined. Before diving into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from, and if you love journeys to reclaim justice like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to not miss the next video. Dalton, Georgia, summer of 1989. The small town nestled among rolling hills and white cotton fields, where every house had a wide porch, every street was shaded by trees, and life moved slowly like the hum of cicadas under the sweltering sun. This was a place where everyone knew each other's names, strangers were rare, and the smallest unusual event was enough to stir the neighborhood. In the dry, heavy heat of the afternoon, Hamilton Medical Center was still lit, and Claire Whitfield, 29 years old, head nurse, a meticulous and punctual woman, left the hospital after a long shift. She said goodbye to colleagues, tucked her notebook into her purse, and walked to the parking lot where her familiar silver Caprice was parked in the back row. The sunlight slanted through the windshield, casting her faint reflection on the car's paint. Claire drove west, the winding road passing through a quiet residential area, small wooden houses, flower gardens, and American flags fluttering on porches. Just after 6, neighbors saw her pull into her driveway, open the trunk to grab some bags, nod a greeting, and walk inside. Everything seemed completely normal, an evening like any other. The sun set slowly, darkness blanketing the street. In the Whitfield house, the kitchen light glowed through the window. Then no one saw her again. When the clock passed 8, the phone in the house rang, but no one answered. By 9, Michael Grant, her husband, called home, planning to say he'd be late, but the phone rang endlessly before going silent. He tried calling again a few times, still hearing only the empty tone. At first, he thought his wife might have gone shopping or visited a neighbor. By 9:30, when a colleague of Claire's called to say she hadn't shown up for her night shift, Michael felt unease creep into his stomach. He called her family, her parents in Athens, her sister in Marietta. No one knew of any plans Claire might have had. Next, he called a few of her close friends, but they all gave the same answer: "No, I haven't talked to Claire today." The restlessness turned to fear. He drove home, the familiar road suddenly stretching longer than ever. When his car pulled up to the porch, Michael immediately noticed something wrong. The front door was unlocked, slightly ajar, the night breeze gently rustling the curtains. Inside, the kitchen light was still on, an unfinished dinner on the table, a plate, knife, fork, and a glass of water still cold to the touch. Claire's nurse jacket was draped over a chair, her work shoes neatly by the door. He called her name, his voice echoing through the empty house, answered only by the slow hum of the ceiling fan and the sound of insects outside. He ran to the neighbors, asking if they'd seen anything unusual, but no one had heard a car, no one had seen Claire leave. One said the light had been on since early evening, assuming she was preparing for her night shift. Michael returned, checked every room, made a few more calls. No one answered. There were no signs of a struggle, but everything was halted mid-moment, as if time in the house had been cut short. He sat at the kitchen table, feeling his heartbeat in the heavy silence. In the small town where nothing big ever happened, Claire's absence became more terrifying than any sound. When the clock struck 10, he knew waiting longer was pointless. Michael stepped into the hallway, picked up the phone, his hand trembling slightly. He dialed the operator, his voice low but firm. He needed to report, his wife was missing. Not long after that call, at the small house at the end of Pinecrest Street, the lights still blazed as the first Whitfield County Sheriff's patrol car pulled in. A young officer, Tommy Hensley, stepped out, adjusted the radio on his shoulder, and scanned the scene. The headlights swept over the dew-damp lawn, landing on the porch where Michael Grant stood waiting, his face ashen. He recounted quickly, his voice hoarse, trying to stay calm. His wife Claire Whitfield left the hospital earlier that evening, but no one had reached her since. She didn't show up for her night shift. The house was open, lights on, car missing from the garage. Hensley jotted brief notes, His eyes glancing at the slightly open door, he stepped inside, wearing thin rubber gloves, and turned on his flashlight. The house was clean, orderly, with no signs of a struggle. On the dining table, the unfinished dinner had gone cold, the glass of water still beaded with condensation. One of Claire's shoes sat by the door, and her purse was nowhere to be found. He noted every detail, snapped a few photos of the scene, and radioed dispatch. Signs of an unusual disappearance. Need to file a report. 10 minutes later, 2 more cars arrived, and a veteran officer, Sergeant Bill McCready, who was in charge of the night shift, ordered the area around the house secured. He spoke to Michael in a calm voice. She might have stepped out in a hurry. We'll sweep the area. McCready and Hensley walked the backyard, shining flashlights along the path behind the fence. Under the damp grass, they found faint shoe prints, smaller than a man's. McCready paused, examined them closely, and marked them with white spray paint. There were no drag marks, but the prints stopped abruptly mid-path, as if the person walking had been called back. Inside, another officer asked for more details. Did Claire have a phone with her? Michael shook his head. Back then, most people still used landlines, and her phone sat on the table by the sofa. Her hospital colleagues confirmed over the phone that Claire was always on time, never missing a shift. These factors shifted McCready's perspective. He returned to his patrol car, radioed in possible missing person under suspicious circumstances. Need search support within a 1-mile radius of the Whitfield house. By 10:30, the quiet neighborhood stirred. 2 ambulances and a fire truck arrived to provide lighting support. Police handed out flyers, knocked on nearby doors, asking if anyone heard noises or saw unfamiliar cars. One woman said around 8:30, she heard a faint sound toward the woods behind the house, like someone closing a car trunk. Another mentioned seeing car headlights flash down the road at that time, but didn't note the license plate. McCready decided to expand the search north, toward Rocky Face Ridge, a wooded area with trails often deserted at night. The search team, 4 officers and 2 civilian volunteers, carried flashlights and took ATVs along the trails. The moonless night sky left only flashlight beams and insect hums, the air thick with the smell of wet grass. As the clock neared 11, a radio crackled. Vehicle located. Hensley, assigned to the northeast, found a silver Caprice parked off the dirt shoulder, about 200 meters from the main trail. The door was open, keys in the ignition, interior light fading. He immediately called McCready over. Shining their flashlights inside, they saw medical documents on the front seat, papers scattered on the floor, and a long light brown hair on the passenger seat. Dried mud streaked the windshield, but the car showed no signs of collision. The trunk was closed, the rear left door slightly ajar. McCready jotted down the license plate, confirming it was Claire Whitfield's car. He instructed Hensley not to touch anything, and secured the scene with caution tape. The team radioed back. As other units continued sweeping the woods for signs of movement, Michael stood at the edge of the cordoned area, hands clenched, face pale. McCready approached, placing a hand on his shoulder, voice low and steady. We found her car, but she's not here. No response came, only a blank stare, and the faint whistle of wind through the trees. Dalton's crisp air now felt heavy. Officers marked coordinates, photographed the scene, and radioed for more search personnel. An official report was filed on site. Missing person, suspicious circumstances. It was the first step from a missing person case to a criminal investigation. In an internal report, McCready wrote a brief note. Victim's vehicle found no occupant. Unusual situation, high likelihood of foul play. As the last flashlights retreated, Rocky Face Ridge remained silent, the silver Caprice standing alone in the dark and thick night fog, the first witness to a story about to unfold. The next morning, the Dalton sky was overcast, with low clouds and air heavy with the scent of damp earth after the night's mist. The forest around Rocky Face Ridge was cordoned off from dawn, yellow tape stretching between trees where the Whitfield County Sheriff's search team continued their unfinished work. Claire's silver Caprice remained there, silent on the red dirt path, its body coated with condensation, the door slightly ajar. Sergeant McCready arrived early, leading a new sweep team of deputies, forensic personnel, and 2 K-9 units from Dalton. He ordered the search to begin from the car's location, radiating out 500 meters, split between south and east. Dogs barked through the forest, dry leaves crunching under boots. Everyone moved slowly, each step leaving heavy mud prints. Around 9 in the morning, a young officer shouted out. McCready rushed over, flashlight beaming into thick grass. About 200 meters southeast of the car, in a patch of tall, dew-soaked grass, they spotted a piece of pale medical scrub fabric. Moving closer, they saw arms bound behind, rope marks leaving deep purple bruises around the wrists. The grass around was heavily trampled, the soil showing slide marks, clear signs of a struggle. McCready signaled everyone to stop, preserving the scene, and called for forensics and photography. In that quiet moment, only the camera's rapid clicks and the scratch of pens filled the air. The body was identified as Claire Whitfield, lying on her side, hair matted to her face, her shirt pulled askew. She still wore her wedding ring and silver necklace, no signs of robbery. 3 clean bullet wounds marked her chest, fired at close range, faint gunpowder residue around them. On her left arm, a deep bite mark stood out, with clear tooth impressions, bruised tissue, and small tears. Forensic techs documented every detail, marking evidence locations, a bullet casing, a green fabric fiber, an unfamiliar shoe print, and faint slide marks toward the car. They placed rulers, took photos, and collected soil and grass samples. The morning temperature aided in estimating time of death, roughly 8 to 10 hours before discovery, meaning Claire died around 11 p.m. the previous night, matching when police found the car. Fluid from the bite mark was swabbed, carefully sealed in a glass vial, and labeled as evidence. Everything was meticulously recorded in the scene log, following standard GBI procedure. Michael Grant was kept at the cordoned area, sitting in a patrol car, hands clenched tightly. McCready said nothing, only nodding slightly, when forensics confirmed the identity. News spread quickly to the station. Victim's body found approximately 200 meters from the vehicle. The simple statement hit the heavy air like the clang of cold metal. After photos and documentation, Claire's body was placed on a stretcher, covered with a white sheet, and taken to the county coroner's office. Another team continued sweeping the area, finding smaller footprints, likely a woman's. Mud on the car's tires matched the soil from the scene perfectly. No cans, cigarette butts, or foreign objects were found. The scene was unusually clean, as if someone deliberately erased traces. By noon, under harsh sunlight, the investigation team paused to seal the scene. In the preliminary report, McCready wrote, "Scene indicates targeted attack, controlled behavior prior to killing. No evidence of robbery motive. Likelihood of perpetrator knowing victim high." News of the body's discovery spread through Dalton by early afternoon. Neighbors stood at their gates, looking toward Rocky Face Ridge, where patrol cars filed out. No one spoke loudly. They only knew that in this usually peaceful town, something had shattered. For those at the scene, the silence wasn't just emotional, it was the void of unanswered questions. Someone had taken Claire from her brightly lit home the previous evening, brought her here, bound her hands, shot her 3 times, left a bite mark, and vanished into the night. As the vehicle carrying her body left the forest, red and blue lights swept across the trees, reflecting on wet soil still bearing footprints. The missing person case had become a homicide, and for Whitfield County, a peaceful night was officially over. That noon, the forest at Rocky Face Ridge sweltered under July's sun, but the yellow police tape held firm around the discovery site. Only the scene investigators, forensics and Whitfield County Sheriff's photographers were allowed in. Sergeant Bill McCready stood at the edge, reviewing the body's location map while directing areas to mark. The ground where Claire Whitfield lay now held only faint stretcher imprints, and a few spots circled in white chalk. The air mixed metallic, musty, and sweaty odors. Every step was cautious to avoid disturbing remaining evidence. The photographer shot 3 layers of images: the car area, the path to the body, and the trampled grass patch. Each angle included a ruler and numbered tags. The photos would be developed and added to the case file that day. Technical deputies brushed away fallen leaves with small brooms, searching for foreign objects. They found 3.38 caliber brass casings scattered within a 2-meter radius, fanned out, suggesting the shooter fired close, possibly as the victim fell. One bullet was lodged in a tree a few steps away, marked V4. Among the thick grass, techs found synthetic green fibers, caught on blades, or stuck to the victim's shirt. These were tweezed into separate paper envelopes, labeled unidentified fibers. A long light brown hair, different from Claire's, was found on her collar and sealed. Soil around the body was collected from 4 spots, each bagged in nylon, labeled, signed, and dated. Each piece of evidence was logged by McCready in the chain of custody record, per 1980 standards, collector's signature, recipient, and transfer time. He stressed precision. Without this, all our work is useless. Evidence management was manual then, bags labeled with ink pens, and sealed with red tape. Though not modern, McCready followed protocol strictly, knowing errors could render the case unusable in court. At the Caprice, techs measured the distance between the car and body, mapping the terrain. The open door and slightly shifted passenger seat suggested the killer's entry point. The windshield was dusty, the body bore dried mud, matching the scene's soil, confirming the car was driven in the forest, not abandoned earlier. A small thin scratch mark was found on the back seat, likely from a sharp object, but its source wasn't located. Forensic tech Diane Porter examined the area where the victim was bound. She brushed thin soil around the wrists, confirming the rope was synthetic paracord, common in police and military use then. A 3-inch remnant was cut, sealed and bagged. McCready stood by, pensive. Not robbery, he said softly. Robbers don't use rope like this. Porter nodded, noting in the preliminary report, rope type not retail, used in law enforcement gear. As the sun dipped, the team shifted to biological samples. A tech with fresh gloves swabbed fluid from the left arm's bite mark. Each swab was replaced, sealed in a small glass tube with a rubber stopper, and labeled biological sample #3. Since DNA testing wasn't common in 1989, they noted send to GBI serology for blood type, enzyme analysis. McCready added a private note, preserve this sample carefully, may be needed later. Another tube held fluid, from the victim's fingernails, in case of defensive traces. By late afternoon, photography measurements and sampling were done. The scene was marked with wooden stakes, noting evidence locations. McCready held a quick briefing at the road's edge, reviewing the initial report. No robbery signs. Victim's possessions intact. 3.38 bullets, close range, specialized restraint rope. Perpetrator likely knew victim and controlled the situation. Deputies took notes, nodding. One asked, can the bite mark help? McCready replied, possibly gender via blood type, if lucky. Otherwise, we keep it until technology catches up. As the sun set behind the ridge, the last light reflected off the police tape. The scene was turned over to forensics. Evidence bags were packed into a sealed metal box, with the chain of custody log bearing McCready's signature. He lingered, staring down the path where flashlights had swept over the silver car the previous night. Now all was silent, but he knew those small traces, fibers, casings, soil, would outlast the crickets or Georgia's forest winds. They were the first pieces of a case no one knew how long would take, and those present couldn't imagine that, over a decade later, these very clues would reopen the door to justice for a woman lying still beneath this earth. The Whitfield County Coroner's Office, in the basement of Dalton's hospital, carried the sharp smell of disinfectant and pale fluorescent light. The morning after Claire Whitfield's body arrived, the autopsy room was so cold that steam rose from the floor. Two techs prepped tools, noting on the board, case #89-1472, Whitfield Claire. Chief Coroner Dr. Howard Gaines, a nearly 30-year veteran, entered with a stern face. He reviewed McCready's scene report, nodded and said, let's proceed. The body lay on a stainless steel table under harsh white light. Claire wore torn medical scrubs, blood soaked around the bullet wounds. Gaines examined her fully, noting 3 gunshot wounds, vertically aligned from shoulder to left chest, restraint marks on wrists and ankles, multiple small bruises along both arms, likely from resistance. He measured the distance between bullet holes, recording it. Close range, about 1 meter, he told the tech. Right to left trajectory, 35-degree angle, descending. Under magnification, gunpowder residue lingered around the wounds, a hallmark of close-range shots. At the left arm, Gaines paused over the bite mark, deep, with bruised tissue and clear tooth impressions. He ordered close-up photos and fluid sampling from the injury. The tech swabbed gently around the bite's edges, sealing it in a glass tube labeled sample #3, bite mark fluid. Preserve carefully, he instructed. Dry naturally before sealing. Once the external exam was done, they began the autopsy. A scalpel cut from sternum to abdomen, the faint metallic sound blending with the steady hum of ventilation. Gaines inspected organs, finding lung and heart damage from bullet paths, confirming death by internal bleeding and circulatory shock from close-range shots. Time of death was estimated between 10:30 and 11 p.m. the previous night, matching when police found the car. Blood, fluid, liver and stomach samples were taken for further testing. Gaines told the tech, "Run serology, check blood type and enzymes." In the adjacent room, basic microscopy and reagents were used: test tubes, chemicals, microscopes. The victim's blood was O positive. However, fluid from the bite and fingernails showed traces of type A blood. He marked the result, presence of foreign blood type A, source unknown. This wasn't enough to identify the perpetrator, but confirmed close contact with another person. Gaines removed his gloves, washed his hands, leaned against the steel table, and said quietly to a colleague, "If this was robbery, they'd have taken something. This feels like control, power." He noted in the preliminary report, multiple gunshot wounds, restraint marks, evidence of close contact bite. Pattern suggests personal motive. By noon, samples were finalized on a small metal tray: blood, fluid, tissue, hair, fabric. The coroner's office lacked modern DNA equipment. Georgia then relied on basic serology and enzyme analysis. Gaines ordered dry samples, seal glass tubes, transfer to GBI storage. Techs used fans to evaporate moisture before sealing with rubber stoppers and red tape, labeling each with handwritten ink, "Whitfield C., preserved for further analysis." As everything was sealed, Gaines wrote the final report: cause of death 3.38 caliber gunshot wounds to the left chest, signs of restraint and struggle, bite mark with non-matching biological sample, foreign blood type A. Preliminary conclusion: intentional homicide, personal motive, perpetrator likely knew victim. Before signing, he paused, adding a small pencil note in the corner: preserve for future testing technology. A habit from his Atlanta days, where colleagues mentioned DNA analysis, a new technique being tested by the FBI and a few states. He doubted it would reach Georgia soon, but felt the bite sample held future value. By afternoon, the coroner's office grew quiet. On a metal rack, the glass tubes with dried blood and fluid were locked in a wooden box, sent to the GBI storage in Decatur. A clerk signed for them, labeling the file, case hash 89-1472, Whitfield. No one in that room knew those small samples would sit untouched for over a decade, stored in a cold vault with the case file, until new technology could awaken them, and the truth they held. The temporary interrogation room of the Whitfield County Sheriff's Office was on the second floor of an old brick building, containing only a wooden table, 2 metal chairs, and a ceiling fan that spun steadily, emitting a dry squeaking noise. The morning after the preliminary forensic results came in, Sergeant Bill McCready began the first round of interrogations. The first person called was Michael Grant, the victim's husband. He sat upright, hands clasped, his eyes shadowed from a sleepless night. In front of him was a full glass of cold water and McCready's open notebook. McCready started with simple questions: what time did Claire leave the hospital? Did she mention meeting anyone? Had she recently met anyone notable? Michael answered clearly, but his voice trembled. He said his wife came home after her afternoon shift, as usual, with nothing out of the ordinary. Did she mention anyone visiting? McCready asked. Michael shook his head. No, she rarely invited anyone over. She usually cooked, called her sister, or her best friend. He said he was at a construction site near Calhoun that evening, got home late, and only called to check in. When he returned, the door was open, and Claire was gone. He paused, staring blankly into space. McCready observed his every move, noting calm, cooperative signs of fatigue. At noon, Michael was taken for a polygraph test. The technician placed electrodes on his wrists and temples, monitoring his responses. Questions focused on relationships, habits, and potential conflicts between the couple. When the results came in, the graph showed unstable fluctuations, slight deviations indicating stress, but not enough to conclude deception. The report noted, inconclusive, no clear evidence of lying. McCready knew the polygraph was only a tool, not admissible evidence. He recorded, not ruled out, but insufficient grounds for suspicion. That afternoon, the investigation team questioned neighbors around the Whitfield home. Ruth Holloway, who lived across the street, said around 8 p.m. she saw the lights on in Claire's house, but heard no noises or saw anyone enter or leave. Another neighbor, Larry Boone, reported that at 9 p.m., while watering his yard, he heard a car slowly pass through the neighborhood, but couldn't identify it. No one saw strangers. All witnesses described Claire as polite, punctual, and without conflicts. The next day, McCready visited Hamilton Medical Center to speak with Claire's colleagues. Nurses described her as dedicated and well-liked. One colleague recalled that a few weeks prior, Claire seemed anxious after receiving an anonymous letter at the office, but dismissed it as personal and never mentioned it again. McCready noted this detail, instructing the team to check the victim's mailbox and office. They found no letter at the house or workplace, only administrative papers. Still, he jotted a reminder possible prior stalking or threats. That evening, a small meeting took place at the station. On a whiteboard, McCready listed 3 theories: 1 robbery, ruled out, as no property was missing; 2 random killing, unlikely due to controlled behavior; 3 personal motive, most plausible. Pointing to a map, he said, "No signs of forced entry, professional-grade rope, close-range shooting." The killer knew the victim and the terrain. An officer asked, "What about the husband?" McCready nodded slightly. "Not ruled out, but if it was him, why stage it so elaborately?" No direct evidence. They agreed to pursue a crime of passion, murder driven by personal or emotional conflict. The next day, McCready called Michael back to clarify a few points. He asked if Michael knew of anyone overly interested in Claire, or any past relationships that could cause trouble. Michael shook his head, but his eyes briefly hesitated. McCready noticed but didn't press. As Michael left, McCready watched him go, writing a final note, "Maybe withholding something. Keep under observation." Meanwhile, the forensic report arrived on his desk, typed clearly: "No signs of forced entry, no missing property, close-range shooting, foreign type A blood found in bite mark, victim type O+. McCready read it, set the paper down, and leaned back. He'd seen many cases, but the bite mark was a unique clue. It suggested the killer didn't just want to kill, but to leave a mark, to claim something beyond the physical. This wasn't a thief's behavior. Late that afternoon, he left the building as sunlight swept across the station's porch. Dalton remained peaceful, but in his mind, the case took shape in darker hues. A young woman, 3 close-range shots, rope marks and a bite, all pointing to one thing. The killer wasn't a stranger, but someone close. Back at his desk, he typed a final line in the interim report. Current evidence points to a murder tied to personal relationships, motive jealousy or personal grudge. Level of familiarity between killer and victim high. Below he signed his name, and closed the file. The Claire Whitfield case was officially classified as a crime of passion, a case that seemed simple, but was beginning to unravel into a fog of an untold story. In the weeks that followed, the Claire Whitfield case dominated Dalton. The local paper published brief reports, avoiding sensational headlines, stating only "Police investigate Whitfield County homicide." No details were disclosed, but rumors spread in coffee shops, hospitals, and neighborhoods. At the sheriff's office, the case file grew thicker daily, yet no substantial leads emerged. Sergeant Bill McCready sat in his small office, walls lined with crime scene diagrams, photos of the body, and forensic results. Everything remained at insufficient evidence. Reviewing the crime scene tech report for the 3rd time, he noticed gaps he couldn't fill. No GSR, gunshot residue, on the victim's hands, a critical detail for determining shooting distance and position during the attack. No one explained why this step was skipped. McCready called the tech team, getting a vague response. "That night, we didn't have the tools at the scene, and we thought forensics would handle it." But the forensic report also lacked GSR data. A small oversight, but enough to cloud the reconstruction of the shooting. Examining the evidence, he found another flaw. The biological sample from the bite mark was stored in a single vial, with no control or duplicate sample. In 1989, protocols didn't mandate dual samples for comparison. McCready knew a single vial meant that if it was damaged or contaminated, the entire biological lead was lost. He sighed, writing in red ink, "Only one sample #3, no control, must preserve strictly." In the fingerprint lab, technicians meticulously reviewed items from the scene: car door, steering wheel, door handles, bullet casings. After 2 weeks, results came back. Of 17 clear prints, only 6 were complete enough for comparison, but none matched records in Whitfield County or or federal databases at the time. Fingerprint systems in 1989 were manual, with prints mailed for comparison, taking weeks. The report stated simply, "No match found." Reading that line, McCready knew the investigation was stalling. Physical evidence led nowhere. Witness statements were vague. Neighbor Ruth insisted she heard no gunshots, though ballistics confirmed 3 close-range shots, meaning the sound would have been loud. But Rocky Face Ridge was sparsely populated, and that night's strong winds might have masked the shots amid insects and highway noise. He crossed out "check gunshot noise" in his notebook, replacing it with a large question mark. Professional killer. The case files between the investigation team and forensics didn't fully align. Evidence collection dates, item labels, and transfer times were off by a day. Some bags were marked July 13th, while transfer logs said July 14th. Checking the evidence locker, McCready found some bags faded, labels smudged from humidity. He ordered rephotographing and relabeling, but knew the chain of custody's reliability was compromised. A single unclear detail could unravel a legal case. Meanwhile, questioning those close to Claire hit a dead end. No one had a clear motive. Colleagues described her as kind, conflict-free. Her family in Athens received no threatening calls. Any late-night calls before the murder left no recorded trace. Police found no suspicious figures at the hospital or neighborhood. McCready still suspected Michael Grant, though evidence was lacking. He had Michael's work routes and time cards checked, all matched. No signs of fabrication. Reluctantly, he crossed Michael off the primary suspect list. His notebook held a stark line, "No specific suspect." As time passed, the Claire Whitfield case faded from the local paper's front page. News stories, traffic accidents, house fires, mayoral elections, took over. In the investigation room, case #89-1472 was filed in a steel cabinet, with dozens of other unsolved cases. On the cover, McCready affixed a red label, "Suspended pending new evidence." He knew pending often meant never progresses in police terms. One late autumn afternoon, as he prepared to leave the office, McCready gazed out the window at trees shedding leaves. He thought of the young woman shot in the woods, her hands bound with paracord, and the tiny biological sample in a glass vial in GBI's cold storage. Everything was frozen there, unmoving. He closed the file, signing the final summary, "Preliminary conclusion, insufficient evidence to identify a suspect. Motive, personal unclear. Status investigation suspended." The next day, the file was moved to storage, nestled among hundreds of others, each a story without answers. The Claire Whitfield case officially went cold, buried with small but fatal errors, mistakes no one then realized would keep the truth dormant for over a decade. In early 1990, after over 6 months without new leads, case #89-1472, Claire Whitfield, was officially marked inactive. A typed internal memo, stamped red by the Whitfield County Sheriff's Office, stated briefly, "No suspect, no new evidence, investigation suspended." Claire's name faded from weekly detective meetings. Crime scene photos, diagrams and notes in McCready's office were removed, replaced by files on robberies, accidents and domestic violence. For law enforcement, it was just one of hundreds of cases cooled by time, but for the Whitfield family, the real tragedy was just beginning. In February, McCready personally oversaw evidence transfer. In the basement storage room, where metal and old paper smells mingled, he laid out the evidence bags, .38 bullet casings, a blue fabric scrap, hair, soil, paracord, and 2 small glass vials with dried bite mark samples. He signed the chain of custody log, confirming transfer to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation GBI main storage in Decatur. The process followed protocol. Evidence was sealed in a metal box, red-taped labeled, "Do not open without authorization." Evidence number 89-1472. Those present, McCready, a technician and an administrator, didn't know this was the last they'd see of it for over a decade. After the evidence left Dalton, life resumed its rhythm. The press stopped covering the case, and Claire's hospital workplace ceased discussing it. But for Michael Grant, returning each night to the house with the once ajar door, guilt lingered. He refused media interviews, avoided questions, and took leave from work. In the house, things remained untouched. Claire's nurse jacket still hung on a chair, her morning coffee cup stored in a cabinet. Claire's parents, the Whitfields rejected insufficient evidence. In March 1990, they sent their first letter to GBI's Criminal Investigation Division, requesting a case review, attaching a forensic report copy. Mr. Whitfield wrote in shaky handwriting, "We don't believe our daughter's case can end like this. Please continue investigating." The response was a brief GBI note, "Received case on hold pending new information." No promises, no follow-up date. Time passed, and Dalton returned to normal. The Claire Whitfield case gathered dust on desks. McCready, who spent nearly 6 months on it, was reassigned to another team. One evening, cleaning old files, he paused at Claire's. He flipped to the last page, rereading his typed words. No specific suspect. Personal motive, undetermined. Closing it, his fingers brushed the red cover label. In that moment, he felt unease, a vague sense of missing something, unnameable. In Athens, Claire's parents kept writing. They sent 3 more letters, the last in 1992. Each time, the response was identical, no progress. Mr. Whitfield called the county office repeatedly, only to be transferred endlessly. Finally, a young staffer said, "We're sorry, but this case is with GBI. They'll contact you with new information." That cold reply extinguished the family's last hope. By the mid-1990s, Claire's case was a sad memory. McCready retired early, keeping a case copy as a professional haunt. At GBI's Decatur storage, the metal box for #89-1472 sat on shelf B4, behind older cases. A staffer, Linda Howard, noted in the annual inventory, "Evidence intact, seal unbroken." The small glass vials with dried samples remained sealed, untouched. Internal reports stated, "No request for further analysis." Dalton gradually forgot Claire Whitfield. New neighbors moved in, few knowing the Pinecrest house was a crime scene. Each July 12, Mr. Whitfield sent a letter, not to GBI, but to himself. He wrote, "You're still in those files, waiting for someone to open them." He carefully stored these letters in a wooden drawer in the living room. In 1998, as Georgia discussed DNA analysis in criminal cases, Claire's case remained forgotten. The CODIS database launched, but no request from Whitfield County sent old samples for testing. The metal box stayed intact, its seal dust-covered. McCready, now in his 60s, read about old cases solved by DNA, and gave a sad smile. He knew the samples sat in GBI's cold storage. Deep down he thought, if someone could read the DNA from that sample, they'd know I was right. This wasn't robbery, but a crime of passion. But in 1990, everything stopped. The Claire Whitfield case sank into silence, a silence lasting over a decade, as deep and cold as the metal box holding its secrets. In the spring of 2001, more than 10 years after the Claire Whitfield case was shelved, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, GBI, opened a new chapter in criminal investigations. At their Decatur headquarters, a new unit called the Cold Case and DNA Unit was officially established, a team dedicated to reviewing unsolved cases from the 1970s to the 1990s, with the goal of applying emerging gene identification technology. At the time, Georgia had only a few laboratories capable of processing STR short tandem repeat DNA, and selecting cases for re-examination was a rigorous process. In the basement evidence storage room of the GBI, where thousands of metal boxes were lined up like a maze, technician Linda Howard, who had been cataloging evidence since the 1980s, was working with the new team to review old cases with intact biological samples. They moved along the long shelves, marking in red ink the cases that met the criteria: properly sealed evidence, documented biological samples, and no prior DNA analysis. At row B4 she paused. On the shelf, between 2 slightly rusted metal boxes, was a case labeled Case #89-1472, Whitfield Claire, Homicide. Linda recognized the familiar handwriting in her old logbook from over a decade ago. Seal intact, 2 biological samples, stable storage. She called over the new cold case unit leader, Special Agent Elijah Moore, to inspect it. Moore, a man in his 40s with short-cropped hair, came from Atlanta's Violent Crimes Unit. Known for his caution and patience, he often focused on overlooked cases with potential for reconstruction through technology. When he read the note and analyzed biological sample, 1989, he froze. "Is this the Dalton case?" Moore asked. Linda nodded, Flipping open the thin accompanying file, inside was a typed summary by Sergeant Bill McCready, dated July 14, 1989. He skimmed the lines: 3 gunshots, a deep bite mark, ligature marks, an unknown a blood type. Then at the bottom, a handwritten note, preserved for future testing technology. A small remark, but enough to make Moore pause for a few seconds. Looks like McCready knew he was leaving something for the future, he said softly. At the next morning's meeting, Elijah Moore presented a list of 12 cases eligible for DNA re-examination. Among them, the Whitfield case was marked medium priority. No standout suspect details, but a perfectly preserved bite mark sample. He proposed including it in the first-generation DNA testing group. His colleagues agreed, partly due to the clean file, partly due to the quality of preservation. During that meeting, the GBI officially launched a program called the Legacy Evidence DNA Project, an initiative to test evidence that had lain dormant for decades. On April 27, 2001, Elijah and Linda personally unsealed the metal box. They worked in a cold-controlled room, recording the entire process. When the red tape was removed, the evidence bags inside were still intact. 2 small glass vials were labeled Sample #3, Bite Mark Fluid, and Sample #5, Fingernail Scrapings. The seals, slightly yellowed but unbroken, held dry clean cotton inside. A small folded paper lay between the vials, with faded handwritten text, "Handle with care." Moore photographed it and logged it into the digital file. He planned to send the samples to the GBI's central lab in Decatur, which had just acquired an STR DNA analyzer, a technology more advanced than the RFLP used in the previous decade. With STR, just a few intact cells could yield a complete genetic profile. If this DNA holds up, Moore told Linda, we'll know who was there with Claire. The technical report was meticulously prepared, reopened for STR DNA testing, priority level medium. Samples obtained from bite mark and fingernail scrapes, dated July 1989. Everything was signed, duplicated, and photographed to avoid chain of custody errors from the 1980s. Moore requested the technical team to check the sample's integrity before formal testing. They examined a small portion of the cotton swab under an electron microscope. The cellular structure was still intact. The room breathed a collective sigh of relief. Days later, Elijah sent an internal memo to GBI leadership. The Claire Whitfield case, Dalton 1989, has potential for DNA analysis to identify a second person at the scene, requesting priority STR testing in the first batch. The proposal was approved. For the first time in 12 years, Claire Whitfield's name reappeared on the active investigation list. As Moore left the storage room, he paused before the long rows of shelves. Light from a small window illuminated the stacked metal boxes, each holding an unfinished story. He knew most would never find closure, but sometimes, a single tiny sample, a carefully sealed glass vial, could bring a name back into the light. Turning to Linda, he said, if this sample yields results, we're not just reopening a case, we're answering a family that's been waiting 12 years. That day, case #89-1472 was removed from the inactive list and updated with a new status, reopened, pending DNA results. A short line, but after more than a decade, it marked the moment the Claire Whitfield case came back to life, fulfilling the promise forensic pathologist Howard Gaines had scribbled on the margin of his report, preserved for future testing technology. The GBI's storage facility in Decatur lay deep in the basement of the main building, a vast, cold, nearly silent space, where thousands of evidence boxes from across Georgia were stacked to the ceiling. Pale fluorescent lights shone down on endless rows of metal shelves, each numbered with faded black ink. Amid this maze, technician Lena Boyd, recently transferred from forensics to the cold case unit, was tasked with checking the preservation status of samples awaiting next-generation DNA testing. Lena was meticulous, with a habit of noting every detail in pencil. That morning, she held a list of 12 cases under the Legacy Evidence DNA Project. The sixth line read, Case #89-1472, Whitfield Claire, possible bite mark sample. Following the shelf code, she stopped at row B4, where 1980s cases were organized. Among the old metal boxes, she spotted one with a faded red seal, handwritten text smudged, Whitfield, Decatur transfer July 1989. Unlocking it, a cloud of dust made her sneeze. Inside, alongside larger evidence bags, an old paper envelope stood out. thicker than usual, its edges yellowed. It bore a blue ink label, bite mark swab, sample #3. One corner was stained, the text barely legible. Lena checked the seal, the red tape was intact, unopened. On the edge was a handwritten signature, H. Gaines, Maryland, the mark of the forensic pathologist, who retired over a decade ago. Her pulse quickened. In the field, finding an unopened biological sample from 1989 was like striking gold. Lena called Special Agent Elijah Moore, the cold case project lead, via internal line. "I think I found the bite mark sample from the Dalton case," she said. "Seals intact, never opened." On the other end, Moore paused for a few seconds before replying, "Don't touch anything, keep it as is, I'm coming down." When Moore arrived, Lena had laid the envelope on the table, wearing rubber gloves, and shining a light on the seal's edge. "No tears, no peeling, it's usable," she said quietly. They reviewed the old chain of custody log. The final entry, from 1989, showed no further transfers. Moore nodded. "So no one's opened or checked it since." He instructed her to photograph every side of the envelope, document the evidence condition, and confirm the seal's integrity. Per GBI's new rules, all evidence required approval from the Evidence Management Division and a supervisor's decision before opening. Moore contacted Dr. Linda Perez, head of the DNA lab, operational for less than 6 months. After hearing the details, Perez asked one question: "Does the sample have complete chain of custody documentation?" Moore replied, "Yes, and the seal's intact." She paused, then said, "Good. Bring it to the lab this afternoon. I'll approve the test opening." Before transfer, Lena performed a final check. She weighed the envelope, noted the weight, photographed every angle, and resealed it in a protective plastic bag. The file copy and transfer log were renumbered. 2001 Whitfield resample. In the notes she added the industry standard line, "Condition intact, label faded but legible." That afternoon, in the DNA unit's negative pressure room, Moore and Lena stood as every step was monitored by cameras. Dr. Perez carefully cut the envelope's edge with a surgical knife, peeling back the old paper. Inside was a small glass vial, wrapped in thin foil, with a faded note, "Sample from left forearm bite, stored dry." As the paper was unfolded, the cotton swab inside the vial remained dry, its tip ivory but free of mold. "Remarkable," Perez said. "Preserved like this after 12 years, and still intact." The three stood still for a moment, as if afraid to disturb the evidence that had slept for a decade. Moore looked at the glass vial, feeling as though he held a piece of time. He signaled Lena to start a new log, reopened for STR DNA analysis, authorized by Cold Case and DNA Unit. With the final signature, the Claire Whitfield case entered a new phase. In her personal notebook, Lena wrote a private note: "June 12, 2001, found bite mark swab envelope, seal intact, sample from 1989 Dalton case, possibly the oldest preserved DNA sample in the state." That evening, alone in the storage room, the pale fluorescent light illuminated rows of other case boxes. She thought of the woman who died in Rocky Face Ridge Forest, of Dr. Gaines, who had written "preserved for future testing technology" on the evidence label, as if he knew this day would come. She smiled faintly, locked the empty metal box, and labeled it anew, "Reopened, 2001." On the table nearby, the evidence envelope now sat in a specialized cold storage box, ready for DNA analysis the next morning. No one said it aloud, but the team knew. If the sample remained intact enough to read, for the first time in 12 years, Claire Whitfield might find her voice, not through testimony, but through the DNA strands left in the bite mark on her left arm. The GBI's DNA lab in Decatur began work earlier than usual that morning. In the negative pressure chamber, the first-generation STR analyzers had just been recalibrated, their cooling systems humming steadily. On the central table, a clear plastic box held the evidence envelope labeled Case #891472, Whitfield Claire, bite mark swab. After 12 years, the case's final sample had reached those who could make it speak. Dr. Linda Perez, head of the DNA unit, personally oversaw the process. Wearing gloves, she opened the box under cold lighting. Inside, the dry cotton swab remained intact, its tip ivory but firm. Lena Boyd, the technician responsible for preservation, stood nearby, documenting each step. "Good dryness," Perez remarked. "This is a rare opportunity." The first step was DNA extraction. A small portion of the swab's tip was cut and placed in a sterile tube with a cell lysis solution. The process occurred in a biosafety cabinet. After 2 hours, the sample went through a centrifuge, yielding a clear liquid layer, the DNA-containing mixture. Perez tilted the tube under the light. Still has fibers, not fully degraded. She preserved it well. She was referring to forensic pathologist Howard Gaines, who sealed the sample in 1989. Once the DNA was extracted, the STR system was activated. The machine's lights blinked green as enzymes began replicating specific gene segments. Each cycle was read by fluorescent electrophoresis, generating a genetic profile. The team gathered around the screen as the first waveforms appeared. Perez leaned closer. Not a single source. There are two, Lena quickly noted. Mixed sample likely victim and foreign DNA. They isolated the victim's DNA by comparing it to Claire's blood sample from the 1989 autopsy report. After multiple runs, the final profile emerged, a complete genetic profile, distinct from Claire's. Perez studied the data, then said slowly, "This is from a female." The room fell silent. Lena looked up, eyes wide. Moore, observing from behind, frowned. "Female, you're sure?" Perez nodded. "Very clear. X chromosomes, no Y. We're not wrong." The finding stunned the team. For over a decade, every theory about the case pointed to a male attacker, a robber, a jealous lover, or a stalker. But this result upended everything. The killer, or at least the person who left biological evidence in the bite mark, was female. Moore stayed quiet for a long moment before saying softly, "If it's a woman, we need to revisit every assumption from 1989, everything." To confirm, Perez ordered a second run of the sample. The process took another 4 hours. When the second profile matched the first perfectly, there was no doubt. The conclusion was logged. Foreign DNA identified as female. Source not matching victim. That afternoon, Moore entered the newly obtained genetic profile into CODIS, the National DNA Database. Georgia joined in 1998. The system was still limited, mostly containing male offender profiles. The computer ran for nearly an hour before displaying a cold message. No match found. No profile matched the female DNA from the case. Moore leaned back in his chair, hands clasped behind his head. He had hoped for a miraculous match, a profile, a name, anything. Instead, he faced a new mystery. A woman unknown to anyone had killed the victim. He wrote in the case log, "Result female DNA present, no CODIS match, unknown source, significance high, Dr. Perez recommended storing the digital profile and reference DNA sample in a -20°C preservation freezer. Lena carefully sealed the tube, labeling it Whitfield DNA Extract, 2001. Before leaving, she glanced at the empty glass vial that once held the 1989 sample. "Strange," she said. "Everything's still here, just now it can talk." Moore took the results report to the 4th floor cold case unit office. On his desk, the Claire Whitfield case file lay open, 1989 crime scene photos in black and white beside it. He reread Sergeant McCready's report. No signs of robbery, high likelihood the perpetrator knew the victim. Moore stared at the line for a long time before placing the DNA results on top. 2 moments, 1989 and 2001, aligned in silence. At day's end, he typed an internal report to GBI Cold Case and DNA Unit from Special Agent Elijah Moore recase #891472, Whitfield Claire STR DNA testing results from the bite mark sample #3 indicate female DNA, not matching the victim, no match found in CODIS, recommend reopening investigation, focusing on female individuals closely connected to the victim or her husband in 1989. He reviewed it, then hit send. The screen displayed message delivered. Outside the window, the Decatur sunset cast a red glow, reflecting off the wall of old case photos. Among them, Claire Whitfield's picture remained a smiling face from a 1988 hospital photo. For the first time in 12 years, her name was tied to new evidence, and for the first time, the investigation had a real direction. Moore turned off the office light and stepped into the empty hallway, his mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? And why was her trace left in the bite mark on a body found in a Georgia forest over a decade ago? When the official DNA report was approved, Elijah Moore was almost certain that Claire Whitfield's case wouldn't remain on the cold case list for much longer. He had investigated dozens of forgotten murders, but few had new evidence as clear as this: a pristine DNA sample, confirmed to be from a female, and entirely distinct from the victims. That result shattered the old theories from 1989, forcing him to start from scratch. In the cold case unit office on the 4th floor of the GBI Decatur headquarters, morning light streamed through a small window, illuminating the thick stack of files in front of Moore. He opened a faded gray folder labeled Case Hash 89-1472. Homicide, Whitfield, Clare. Inside were handwritten reports, crime scene maps, old yellowed photographs, and scattered notes from Sergeant Bill McCready's investigation. The smell of aged paper mixed with ink gave him the sense of tracing a soul buried in documents. He reread every line, scrutinized every detail, comparing them to the new data. The more he read, the more he realized the case had too many gaps, as if someone had rushed to close it. McCready's report noted, no signs of forced entry, no stolen property, perpetrator likely known to the victim. A sound observation, but it seemed no one pursued that lead after the case was marked inactive. Elijah flipped to the witness statements, noticing Michael Grant, the victim's husband, was interviewed multiple times. Grant's answers aligned with his alibi of working at a construction site that night. But what caught Moore's attention wasn't what Grant said, it was what he didn't. Throughout the file, there was no mention of personal relationships beyond family and coworkers. No close friends, no old acquaintances, no one suspicious, too clean, and that itself was suspicious. Moore moved to the personnel statements section. A report from Hamilton Medical Center noted that weeks before her murder, Claire had told a coworker about a strange woman following her in the parking lot, but no one identified her. That report was tucked at the back of the file, unmarked as processed. He jotted down, verify witness, female stalker, possible suspect. By late afternoon, Moore found a thinner document, loosely stapled, titled, Law Enforcement Contact Log, July 1989. It was a shift log for the entire sheriff's office during the week of the murder. He scanned the names, passing dozens of male officers, until he stopped at a handwritten entry. Deputy Mary Ann Cole, Patrol Area 3, July 12, 1989, 18 o'clock to 23 o'clock. He read it again. Patrol Area 3 was Rocky Face Ridge, where Claire's body was found. A deputy was near the crime scene that night, but never mentioned in the investigation report. Moore leaned back in his chair, flipping through the personnel records. Mary Ann Cole's name appeared only once, with no witness statement or crime scene report. Most other officers had at least one account of assisting the search. That's odd, he muttered. Why wasn't she interviewed? Moore dug deeper into Mary Ann Cole. On the GBI's internal system, he pulled up Whitfield County Sheriff's Office personnel records from 1987 to 1991. A file appeared. Cole, Mary Ann E., born 1960, joined the force in 1985, graduated from the Georgia Police Academy. In 1989, she was a deputy assigned to patrol northern Dalton. A note added transferred to Narcotics Division, 1991. No violations, no disciplinary records. Her file was impeccably clean, but when Moore opened her personal details, one thing stopped him. Cole's old address was on the same street as the construction site where Michael Grant worked. He paused, then searched public civilian records. After a few clicks, pieces started falling into place like scattered puzzle parts. Mary Ann Cole had attended the same high school as Michael Grant, and old demographic records showed they lived in the same neighborhood in the early 1980s. Some old contacts in a phone directory even listed their numbers side by side in the same student apartment complex in Rome, Georgia. Moore sat still, tapping his fingers on the desk. She knew Michael. The more he thought, the more the case's hidden details began to take shape. A woman who knew the victim, worked in law enforcement, had access to a gun and restraints, was in the crime scene area at the time, and now, the DNA from the bite mark was female. It all fit, at least logically. That evening, Moore stayed late in the office, the computer screen's glow reflecting on his pensive face. He opened a new report file, and typed the first line, GBI Cold Case Unit, Reinvestigation Log 2001 Case Hash, 89-1472, Whitfield, Claire DNA results confirm female source, non-victim. July 1989, shift log shows, Deputy Mary Ann Cole present in the crime scene area at the time. Personal connection between Cole and the victim's husband, Michael Grant, preliminarily verified. He paused, staring at the blinking cursor. His instincts told him he was onto something bigger than a forgotten case, possibly internal misconduct, or worse, a systematic cover-up. He saved the file, locked his desk drawer, and turned off the light. As he left the office, the hallway light cast shadows on the wall of victim photos. Among the faded faces, Claire Whitfield's gaze seemed to follow him to the door. Elijah Moore stepped into the Decatur night, carrying a name he knew he couldn't let rest: Mary Ann Cole. Elijah Moore spent the next week diving deeper into Deputy Mary Ann Cole's records. The more he read, the more the small details in the 1989 reports grew suspicious, not for what was obvious, but for the gaps. In the list of personnel involved in the Claire Whitfield case, Cole's name was completely absent, despite the shift log showing she was supposed to be in the Rocky Face Ridge area the night of the murder. That was the first clue that something might have been covered up. He contacted the Whitfield County Sheriff's Office to borrow the original personnel files. After 2 days, a box of paper records arrived at the cold case unit. Moore opened it, sat under a desk lamp, and sorted through each sheet. The July 1989 shift schedule was typewritten, with handwritten corrections in blue ink along the margins. Cole's name was lightly crossed out, replaced with A. Jensen, a name that didn't appear in any other weekly reports from that time. Under closer inspection, the blue ink lay over older black ink, meaning someone had overwritten it later. Under the lamp, the faint black text revealed itself, clearly M. Cole. Moore photographed it with a digital camera, zooming in on the screen. No doubt, the shift log had been manually altered. He marked it with a sticky note, writing tampering suspected, original shift reassigned after incident. Part of the truth had been changed, and it might have kept the case buried for over a decade. Next, he tracked down people who worked with Cole at the time. Some had retired, others changed careers, but most were still in Georgia. Moore made calls, sent letters, and arranged meetings. The first to agree to talk was Robert "Bobby" Gaines, a former sergeant who oversaw training in 1989. They met at a coffee shop in Rome, a small town an hour's drive from Dalton. Bobby walked in, hair grayed, but memory sharp. When Moore mentioned Mary Ann Cole, he frowned. "I remember her," he said. "Skilled, determined, but short-tempered. Once nearly fought a colleague over a joke." He sipped his coffee and lowered his voice, and there was personal stuff. "Everyone in the unit knew she dated a guy named Michael Grant, I think, worked in construction, married to a nurse. I thought they got married." Moore kept his composure, but scribbled, "Personal relationship between Cole and Michael Grant, confirmed by colleague." Gaines added, "After that wife was killed, Cole took a month's leave, said she was caring for her sick mom. When she came back, she didn't talk to anyone, then transferred to narcotics. No one thought much of it back then." Another account came from Deputy Harold Dixon, who shared a shift with Cole in 1989. Over the phone, Dixon spoke slowly. "I remember that night, a messy shift, because of a car accident report. Cole told me to go ahead, said she'd check Rocky Face Ridge. Never heard back from her. Next morning, I heard about the murder there. When I asked, she said she saw nothing. Probably robbers." His voice dropped. "Didn't suspect her then, but now that you mention it, gives me chills." The fragmented accounts formed a clearer picture. Mary Ann Cole, with a past romantic connection to the victim's husband, was in the crime scene area, and her shift log was altered afterward. Moore knew he needed physical evidence to solidify the theory, something tying Cole to the scene beyond rumors. He recalled the blue fabric fiber, collected from the victim's blouse in 1989, sealed with the biological samples. The next day, he went to the evidence storage room. Lena Boyd, the technician who found the bite mark sample, helped him retrieve a small bag labeled fiber sample, unknown origin, found on victim's blouse. The fiber was hair-thin, deep blue. They placed it under a microscope, analyzing its structure. Polyester nylon blend, double weave, typical of sheriff's office uniforms from 1988, 1990. To be certain, Moore requested a comparison with old uniform samples in the GBI's wardrobe archive. The results were undeniable. Under the microscope, the fiber from the crime scene and the uniform sleeve matched almost perfectly, from weave structure, to sheen, to synthetic dye type. The forensic report confirmed, high probability match, same manufacturer and batch. Lena looked up, saying softly, "Meaning the killer wore a sheriff's uniform that night." Moore didn't respond immediately. He sat silent for a few seconds, hearing the hum of the air conditioner. The pieces fit: female DNA at the bite mark, tampered shift log, connection to the victim's husband, and now a fiber matching the sheriff's uniform. All pointed one way. He opened his notebook, writing in bold, Primary suspect identified. Deputy Mary Ann Cole, present at crime scene area. Shift schedule. Tampered personal connection to victim's husband. Fiber match with sheriff's uniform. 1988 batch. DNA evidence. Female source. Non-victim. Closing the notebook. Moore knew he wasn't just chasing a murder case, he was entering dangerous territory, where the line between justice and protecting insiders had buried many files. He turned to Lena, saying quietly, "From now on, everything about Cole stays strictly confidential. We can't let anyone know until we have an official warrant." That evening, he left the office late. Outside, Decatur's rain pounded the car windows. In the rearview mirror, the city lights reflected his face, tired but resolute. The Claire Whitfield case, after 12 years, finally had a real name to call, Mary Ann Cole. But Moore knew the investigation was no longer just about finding a killer, it was about facing a system that had once shielded her. The following weeks, the air in the cold case unit felt heavy, like fog. Elijah Moore shared the new investigative direction, only with Lena Boyd and the GBI's technical director. All information about Mary Ann Cole was locked in a secure cabinet, with Moore holding the only key. "If she's really the one we're thinking of," he said, "any small mistake could collapse the entire case." The first step was retesting all evidence with modern technology. The GBI's forensic lab now had ballistic scanners and 3D crime scene software, tools non-existent in 1989. Under the cold green light of the simulation room, Moore and the technical team rebuilt the case from old data: the position of the silver Caprice, where Claire's body was found, bullet casing trajectories, and distances between wounds. From 1989, crime scene photos, they identified 3 bullet wounds, at a diagonal, right to left, descending, matching a shooter about 5'6" to 5'8", shorter than most men, but consistent with Mary Ann Cole's height in her personnel file. The ballistic software showed the shooter stood about 1.5 meters from the victim, firing as Claire backed away, possibly pushing the attacker. The first shot hit her right shoulder, the second pierced her lung, and the third fatal shot came as she fell. "Not a robber's work," the ballistic expert said. "This is someone skilled, with good aim control, calm." Next, they analyzed the restraint marks and struggle evidence. Crime scene data showed Claire was bound with paracord before death, tied in a loop and cinch style, a common police technique for restraining suspects. The wrist marks showed pressure from behind, indicating the attacker stood behind her while tightening the cord. Lena projected the simulation on screen. "This is professional. Civilians don't tie like this." They built a 3D model of Rocky Face Ridge, using satellite images and new topographic data, simulating the movement of 2 people in that space. The software showed one scenario matching all evidence. The victim left her car, confronted the attacker, was quickly subdued, struggled briefly, then shot at close range. In the model, the body's position aligned with the attacker's exit path, toward the main trail, where Cole was assigned to patrol. Moore stood before the projection, watching the virtual figures move in the simulated space. He couldn't look away from a detail: the shooter angled the gun precisely, like trained police, one hand steady, the other supporting the grip. "She knew exactly what she was doing," he said. "No panic, no stray shots, every move deliberate." Revisiting the bite mark, the team used software to analyze the victim's body position. From the bite angle and teeth marks, they determined Claire was alive, fighting back. The bite occurred during the struggle, before the shooting. This was key. It showed the attacker didn't strike from a distance, but had direct, intense, emotional contact. Once again, it supported McCready's 1989 crime of passion theory. To strengthen the case, Moore requested reanalysis of the .38 bullet casings. Under an electron microscope, they compared rifling marks and firing pin impressions, with data on guns issued to the sheriff's office in the late 1980s. The result: the markings matched the Smith & Wesson Model 36, the standard sidearm for patrol officers at the time, the same model issued to Mary Ann Cole per her equipment records. The evidence stacked up: female DNA at the bite mark, sheriff's uniform fiber, tampered shift log, now ballistic marks, matching a law enforcement weapon. Moore sat in the conference room, surrounded by printed simulation results and analysis reports. He said nothing, flipping through pages, marking key lines in red. Bullet trajectory indicates professional shooting skill. Victim's binding matches police restraint technique. Fiber matches sheriff's office uniform. 1988 batch. Female DNA unidentified. Matches debris sample from suspect Cole pending confirmation. Lena stood nearby, watching silently. She knew they were close to closing the investigative loop, but Moore wanted certainty. He asked the technicians to recreate the crime scene life-sized, using 3D plastic models. Under the lights, the reenactment showed Claire being subdued, struggling and the attacker firing 3 shots in succession. The sound echoed, dry and final. No one spoke. Moore turned to Lena, voice low. Not an amateur. She knew how to strike, when to shoot. A cop. The next day, he compiled a comprehensive report for the GBI directors. In it he concluded, preliminary findings, case #89-1472 reopened trajectory analysis, 3 close-range shots, consistent with trained shooter, fiber match identical to Sheriff's Office uniform 1988 batch, binding technique, law enforcement style restraint, probable shooter height and stance, consistent with Deputy Marianne Cole, sufficient grounds for suspect designation. The report was signed, sealed and filed for prosecution. Elijah Moore knew he had laid the final brick in a chain of evidence, spanning 12 years. As he left the room, noon light spilled down the long cold hallway. One thought echoed in his mind. We found the person who stood in those woods that night, and that name was no longer a suspicion. Marianne Cole was now the prime suspect in the Claire Whitfield case. When the crime scene reconstruction report was approved, Elijah Moore knew it was time to shift from inference to proof. Every piece of evidence pointed in one direction, but only one thing could convict Marianne Cole in court: DNA. They had the perpetrator sample from the 1989 bite mark, but to confirm, they needed a direct comparison sample. The problem was, Marianne Cole, a former deputy sheriff, knew forensic procedures inside out and would never voluntarily provide a sample. So, Moore opted for the only feasible method: covert trash collection, a legally permissible tactic when investigators have clear grounds to suspect someone but lack sufficient cause for an arrest warrant. Moore drove with Lena Boyd to Dalton early Monday morning. The town remained as quiet as it had been 12 years earlier, its main streets unchanged, except for newer signs and a few bank buildings along the boulevard. Now 41, Cole worked in the Sheriff's Office Administrative Department after transferring from the narcotics unit years ago. Records showed she lived alone in a single-story brick house on Dalton's south side, no husband, no children. Moore chose to observe from a distance, avoiding contact with anyone in the county to prevent leaks. That morning, they parked across from the administrative building. Through binoculars, Lena saw Cole step out, wearing a light gray shirt, sunglasses, and carrying a plastic coffee cup with a lid. She got into her old model sedan and left the lot. Moore started the car, tailing her from 2 blocks away. They followed her to a small roadside eatery, Dalton Diner, a frequent breakfast spot for local police. Cole sat at her usual table near the window, ordering coffee and an egg sandwich. Lena noted the exact time, 7:43 a.m. For over 20 minutes, Cole read the newspaper, ate, and ordered a coffee to go. When paying, she left her used cup and straw on the table. Moore and Lena sat at the counter in the back, blending in. As Cole left, they waited for the server to clear the table. Lena stood first, casually approaching and saying softly, "Excuse me, I need to speak with the manager." Meanwhile, Moore, wearing medical gloves under a napkin, wrapped the cup and straw in a brown paper bag and slipped it into an evidence folder. The entire move took less than 10 seconds, so smooth no one noticed. Leaving the diner, they stopped 2 blocks away. Lena placed the cup and straw in a pre-sealed plastic container, labeling it with a black marker, "Surveillance Sample, M. Cole, Dalton, Georgia, 7:56 a.m. She signed it, and Moore countersigned beside her. A temporary chain of custody form was drafted in the back seat, noting the time, location, collector, and witness. They carefully sealed the container with red evidence tape and placed it in a portable cooler with dry ice. "First step done," Moore said. "Now we wait for one more sample to be sure." That noon, they continued surveilling Cole in downtown Dalton. She left the office for lunch, stopping at another coffee shop, carrying a disposable cup. When she tossed it into an outdoor trash bin, Lena moved quickly, using fresh gloves to retrieve the cup and place it in a separate plastic bag. 2 independent samples collected in one day, enough for comparison. That afternoon, they drove back to Decatur with the sealed cooler. On the way, Lena stared out the window, the steady hum of wind passing the car. "Do you think she knows?" she asked. Moore shook his head. She was a cop, so she might sense something's off, but it doesn't matter. Evidence doesn't lie. That evening, at the DNA unit, Dr. Linda Perez personally received the samples. Per protocol, she checked the seals, signatures, and chain of custody details. Everything was perfect. She signed the received by Dr. L. Perez, 1722 line. The samples were recoded, ref-01 cold DNA. The samples were recoded, ref-01 cold DNA. A small piece of the straw was cut, placed in a sterile vial, and processed using the same STR method as the 1989 sample. 2 days later, the preliminary report showed sufficient DNA for comparison. Cole's genetic data was stored in a separate file, awaiting comparison with the Whitfield DNA extract. 2001, the female DNA from the bite mark. Moore couldn't hide his tension. He knew a single match could reopen the case with an arrest warrant. If not, 12 years of effort would fade into silence. That night, Moore returned to his small Decatur hotel. He opened his laptop, reviewing every piece of evidence: crime scene photos, ballistic diagrams, the altered duty log, fiber reports, and now the new chain of custody record. On his desk, McCready's 1989 handwritten note lay under protective glass. Preserve sample for future technology. Moore stared at it for a long time. The technology had arrived, and he knew that tomorrow, when the comparison results came in, the truth McCready had sensed might finally be proven. Before turning off the light, he called Lena. 8 o'clock tomorrow, he said. We'll know everything. On the other end, Lena replied softly, I know, and if it's what we think, she won't escape anymore. The line went silent. In the quiet room, Elijah Moore sat for a moment, listening to the night traffic outside. 12 years of investigation, hundreds of pages of files, the dead and the silent, all would come down to a single comparison. He closed his notebook, whispering almost to himself, tomorrow, 1989 meets 2001. The next morning, Elijah Moore arrived at GBI headquarters earlier than usual. The fourth-floor hallway was empty, save for the hum of the air conditioner. He paused outside the DNA unit, still holding an untouched coffee. Through the glass, he saw Lena Boyd and Dr. Linda Perez already there, standing by the STR analyzer, running its final cycle. The green light from the screen reflected on their tense, focused faces. As he entered, Perez said softly, running the final match phase. On the screen, 2 DNA profiles ran side by side. One was ref-01 Cole DNA, from Marianne Cole's straw and cup. The other was Whitfield DNA extract, 1989, from the bite mark on Claire Whitfield's left arm. The room was silent, except for the steady hum of the machine's fan. The first set of markers matched, then the second, the third. Perez took a deep breath, pointing at the screen with a stylus. 13 STR markers, complete match. Lena turned to Moore, her eyes gleaming. No mistake, it's the same person. Moore stepped closer, studying the numbers below the graph. Every genetic locus, every DNA segment, matched perfectly. Not just similar, identical. He felt time stop around him. All the months chasing the case, the sleepless nights poring over files, the once vague theories, now framed in a single result. Marianne Cole was the one who left the bite mark on Claire Whitfield's body. Run a second confirmation, Moore said quietly, his voice hoarse with emotion. Perez nodded, entering the commands to analyze the data with the lab's secondary independent software. Over an hour later, the results were identical. No discrepancies. The probability is 1 in 10 trillion. Perez read. Statistically, there's no doubt. They printed a 3-page preliminary report, stating, DNA profile match, sample #3 bite mark, 1989, and sample #01, Marianne Cole, 2001, confirmed through independent verification. Perez signed, stamped the DNA unit seal, and handed the paper to Moore. His fingers trembled slightly as he took it. This is it, he said, the evidence McCready waited a lifetime for. In that moment, no one spoke. Lena quietly removed her gloves, placing them neatly on the table, her gaze drifting to the window. She was a cop, she said softly. She probably never thought that bite would come back to find her. Moore stayed silent, replying only, no one escapes science. That afternoon, a copy of the results was sent to an independent lab in Atlanta for cross-verification. Per Georgia regulations, all DNA conclusions in cold cases required confirmation by an external unit before going to the prosecutor. 2 days later, The second confirmation returned, stamped in red, result verified, 100% match. No possibility of error. Moore compiled the entire case file, clipping the results to the front, and placed it on his desk. He turned on the desk lamp, rereading the title, Case #89-1472, Whitfield Clare, DNA Match Report. Relief washed over him, but with it came an odd chill. He understood the weight of this discovery. A killer had lived freely, for over a decade, while wearing the uniform of justice. That evening, he drafted a report to the GBI director and the Georgia District Attorney. It was concise but thorough. To District Attorney, State of Georgia, from Special Agent Elijah Moore, GBI Cold Case Unit, Case #89-1472, Whitfield Clare, DNA testing. From the 1989 biological sample, bite mark shows a complete match with DNA collected from Marianne Cole's personal items. 2001. Results independently verified by a private lab in Atlanta. Recommendation: reopen the case and issue an emergency arrest warrant for Marianne Cole, former Whitfield County Deputy Sheriff, for first-degree murder. He reviewed it once before signing. Each word closed a 12-year silence. When the final signature dried, Moore sealed the file in a red envelope and sent it to the legal department. 3 hours later, Georgia District Attorney Sarah Kendall called back. Her voice was low, resolute. "Elijah, I've seen the results. No doubt whatsoever. We'll request the warrant within 48 hours. Keep it strictly confidential until the writ is issued." Moore replied, "Understood. No one outside our team knows." After the call, he sat alone in his office. Outside, dusk settled, faint light filtering through frosted glass. He opened a drawer, pulling out a 1988 photo of Clare Whitfield that McCready had kept in the file. She smiled, eyes bright, hair slightly tousled in the wind. Moore placed the photo beside the DNA report, the victim and her killer's evidence side by side. "Justice took 12 years to arrive," he said softly, "but it's here." That night, Lena stayed late at the lab, packing the DNA samples into a special storage box. After sealing it, she placed a small note on the lid, "Match confirmed, 2001. The brief words carried the weight of an entire case. The next morning, Moore drove back to Dalton, where it all began. He stopped at Rocky Face Ridge, now fenced off with new no trespassing signs. The early breeze swept through the hills, the damp grass scent lingering, just like in the old crime scene photos. He stood there a long time, staring into the woods, then said softly, "We found her, Claire, and this time, no one will be forgotten." On the way back, his phone buzzed, a short text from D.A. Kendall, "Warrant in process." He gripped the steering wheel, nodding slightly. 12 years after the final shot, in that Georgia forest, justice had begun to move. On the morning of October 10, 2001, a thin fog blanketed Dalton, as Special Agent Elijah Moore's car left GBI's Decatur headquarters, heading straight for Whitfield County. On the passenger seat was a thick red-sealed case file, containing an emergency arrest warrant signed by a Whitfield County judge, at 6 a.m. that day. At the bottom, in bold, defendant, Marianne E. Cole, charge murder in the first-degree case #89-1472, Whitfield Clare. After 12 years, that paper was the culmination of thousands of investigative hours, ending the silence Dalton had grown accustomed to. Moore wasn't driving alone. In the back sat Georgia DA Sarah Kendall, overseeing the arrest execution, and 2 GBI support agents. They'd finalized the plan the previous night: apprehend Marianne Cole at the sheriff's office, where she now worked as an administrative clerk, not at her home, not in public, but in the very space that once symbolized her authority. It was a tactical and symbolic choice, justice returning to where it had been obscured. Before reaching Dalton, Moore had secretly contacted the Whitfield County Sheriff, the successor after Clare's case was closed. He listened, paused, then said, "If it's as you say, I won't interfere. She's on the second floor, administrative section. I'll clear the area when you arrive." That was all Moore needed, a clean, bloodless, quiet arrest. At 9:15, the GBI convoy stopped at the sheriff's office, a 2-story brown brick building in downtown Dalton. The Whitfield County Sheriff's Department sign had faded with time. Moore turned off the engine, glancing at the sign. Lena Boyd, in the back, held a bio-evidence bag. "You ready?" she asked. Moore nodded silently. They entered through a side door, met by the sheriff. "She's in the records office, end of the right hallway," he said. "This floor's a no-weapon zone, so she's unarmed." Moore thanked him, signaling the two agents to follow closely. When the door opened, Marianne Cole stood at a photocopier, hair neatly up, wearing a white shirt, looking like any other clerk. She looked up, her pale gray eyes flickering with unease as three strangers and a woman with a GBI badge entered. Moore held up his badge, voice calm and steady. "Deputy Cole, I'm Special Agent Elijah Moore, GBI. You're under arrest per a Whitfield County Court warrant for first-degree murder in the 1989 Claire Whitfield case." The room fell dead silent. The photocopier halted mid-cycle, paper jammed in the tray. Marianne stood still for a few seconds, then gave a tired smile, as if hearing an old story. 12 years, she said softly. "You finally came. No resistance, no shouting." She gently removed her glasses, setting them on the desk. "I want to know who dug this up," she added. Moore replied curtly, "Justice was never buried, just asleep." The two agents stepped forward, reciting her Miranda rights. Cole raised her hands, letting them cuff her wrists in front. No struggle. Lena stood quietly by the door, eyes fixed on the suspect's eerily calm face. In the cold hallway light, the image of a middle-aged woman escorted from her former colleague's workplace left everyone breathless. As Cole was led downstairs, a few staff stopped to stare, faces filled with confusion. The sheriff stood at the door, nodding slightly. "Keep it quiet," he said. "Let them go." The metal door closed, the lock clicking like a punctuation mark on a decade of pretense. At the county courthouse holding room, Cole's cuffs were removed, and she sat at a stainless steel table. Moore reread her rights, then presented the arrest warrant for her signature. She skimmed the paper, signing with a slightly trembling but firm hand. "Do you know what it's like to be betrayed by your own colleagues?" she asked. Moore met her gaze. "Do you know what it's like for someone to wait 12 years for justice?" Per protocol, the forensic team collected reference samples, hair, blood, and oral swabs. Lena gloved, worked swiftly. Cole didn't resist, just looked around the bare room. As Lena clipped a lock of hair and sealed it in a plastic bag, she asked softly, "Anything you want to say?" Marianne gave a faint smile. "If I told you, you wouldn't believe me. We all do terrible things for love, don't we?" Then silence. After the procedure, Moore signed the chain of custody form, confirming the reference sample's validity. The sheriff signed as the third witness. All documents were copied and sent to the DNA unit in Decatur for filing. As Cole was escorted to the GBI van, the last morning clouds cleared from Dalton. Passers-by didn't know the woman being led away had once protected them. Inside the van, Marianne stared out the window, voice even, "You won't find anything beyond what I left behind, and I know you think you understand everything, but Claire wasn't as innocent as you believe." Moore didn't respond. He looked straight at the road ahead. In the rearview mirror, Marianne Cole's face faded, but her eyes remained sharp, as if piercing through glass in the past. That afternoon, back at GBI Decatur, Moore handed the file and evidence to the legal department. The day's final report noted, "Arrest executed without incident, subject compliant. Additional reference samples collected successfully." Elijah Moore closed the file, set it on the desk, and sat quietly. After 12 years, every lead had converged. The investigation circle was complete, and for the first time, the killer's name was no longer a guess. Outside, the sun set behind the trees. In the fading light, the warrant's text stood out, "State of Georgia versus Marianne E. Cole." Moore said softly, like a closing note, "Justice came late, but this time it won't miss." The morning after Marianne Cole's arrest, a team of GBI agents was dispatched to Dalton to execute a search warrant at the suspect's home. Cole's single-story brick house stood isolated on the southern edge of town, in a quiet area lined with elm trees along both sides of the road. As the agents' vehicles pulled up to the driveway, the sky was still cloaked in thin fog, the grass damp with dew. The house was silent, its front door locked tight, curtains drawn, as if everything inside was trying to hold on to the secrets of the past. At exactly 8 a.m., the forensic team, led by Lena Boyd, entered after local police confirmed the house was empty. Elijah Moore held the search warrant, his voice stern, "Prioritize seizing personal weapons, uniforms, and any documents related to July 1989. Do not disturb items unnecessarily." They began in the bedroom, then moved to a small office at the back of the house. In an old wooden dresser drawer, Lena found a silver metal box. It was covered in thick dust, but the lock gleamed. Wearing gloves, she opened the latch. Inside, lined with red velvet, was a Smith & Wesson Model 36 revolver, .38 caliber, the standard issue for Georgia police in the late 1980s. Next to it were 3 old brass bullets, and a small cloth bag containing a firearms permit, dated March 1988. Elijah saw it, and frowned. She kept that old gun for over a decade. He signaled for the forensics team to photograph, measure, and log the seizure. The barrel still bore a layer of preservative oil, evidence of regular cleaning. In the drawer below, Lena found 2 old police uniforms, neatly folded in clear nylon bags. One had a small tear on the right sleeve, the same location as a green fiber collected at the 1989 crime scene. She carefully cut a nail-sized piece of fabric, sealed it, and labeled it, "Fiber sample, right sleeve uniform." Elijah closely examined the faded Whitfield County Sheriff's Office logo, and below it, the embroidered name, M. Cole. Every detail matched the old case file. On the desk they found a black leather notebook, so worn the spine was peeling. Its first page marked 1989. Flipping through the early pages, most entries were just shift schedules and patrol notes. But in mid-July, a line written in black ink was crossed out, replaced by different handwriting in blue ink. Off-shift swap. Lena examined it under UV light. The original text was still clear beneath. Reading night shift. Area 3, Rocky Face Ridge. Once again, the evidence aligned with Moore's findings in the altered shift logs. In the adjacent drawer, Moore discovered an old envelope with no address. Only a scrawled note, "If you don't choose me, don't let her show up in front of me again." The handwriting bore no date, but her was underlined with heavy vertical strokes. He placed the letter in an evidence bag, saying nothing, only tightening his grip on his briefcase. When the search concluded, all items were sealed. 38 revolver, 2 uniforms, the shift notebook, and the handwritten letter. A piece of fabric from the right sleeve was sent immediately to the Decatur Forensic Lab for comparison with the sample from victim Claire Whitfield's clothing. 3 days later, the results came back. Fiber match confirmed, 100% identical in dye composition, thread count, and manufacturer batch. Simultaneously, the ballistics unit completed its comparison between Cole's Smith & Wesson and the shell casings from the 1989 crime scene. The report stated, "Marks on firing pin and barrel rifling, consistent with weapon registered to Deputy Mary Ann Cole. Probability of same weapon used in Whitfield homicide, extremely high." Moore read the results, his hand trembling slightly. Each line felt like another nail in the coffin of a case dormant for 12 years. "So she wasn't just there," he said to Lena. "She pulled the trigger." The final step in building the case was standardizing all forensic data. Lena oversaw compiling results from various departments: DNA, ballistics fibers, documents. Each piece of evidence was assigned a QR code and a new chain of custody number to ensure no disputes at trial. They photographed a reconstructed crime scene, integrating previously created 3D data. In the model, the shooter's position matched Cole's height and the sight line of the gun. The technician's conclusion read, "Shooter height, approximately 5'7", right-handed, consistent with suspect." In the final internal GBI meeting, prosecutor Sarah Kendall read the summary aloud. "We have matching DNA, uniform fibers, confirmed ballistics, and tampered shift logs. This is a complete evidence package." Moore nodded silently, placing a copy of the letter found in Cole's home on the table. "If you don't choose me." Sarah glanced at it, whispering, "Jealousy motive. Clearer than any hypothesis." That evening, after everyone left the office, Moore stayed behind alone. On the desk, the new evidence photos were neatly arranged. The gun, the uniform piece, the notebook, the letter. He stared at them for a long time, then opened a drawer and pulled out an old photo of Claire Whitfield, placing it beside them. Between these images, a woman killed, and the woman who held the gun, was a 12-year gap of silence and cover-up. "They lived in the same town, walked the same streets," he said softly. But only one came back. The next day, the GBI issued an internal memo. "The 1989 Whitfield case investigation is complete, all forensic evidence standardized, ready for presentation to the Georgia State Prosecutor." Elijah Moore left the building that morning, carrying nothing but a copy of the ballistics report. The Dalton sky was clear, a light breeze rustling through the trees. In his mind, one thought echoed. Finally, the truth had found its voice. In the Georgia State Prosecutor's office in Atlanta, on the morning of October 22, 2001, the 7th-floor meeting room felt heavy, like a miniature courtroom. On the table sat a case file, nearly 6 inches thick, its red cover stamped State of Georgia Viv Marianne E. Cole, case hash 89-14472. The cover bore the fresh signatures of Special Agent Elijah Moore and Chief Prosecutor Sarah Kendall, who would lead the prosecution in what was considered one of the state's most complex cold cases. Beside Kendall were 2 assistant prosecutors, 3 GBI forensic experts, and a representative from the cold case unit. All had been involved in the case for the past 8 months. On the large screen at the head of the table, text read Prosecution Brief, Whitfield Case. Moore opened his laptop, presenting each section of the comprehensive report he'd finalized the previous night. Miss Kendall, the evidence is complete, he said. We have 4 key evidence groups. He pointed to the screen. DNA match, conclusive evidence biological sample, from a bite mark on victim Claire Whitfield's hand, collected in 1989, matched via 2001 STR technology, to DNA from Marianne Cole's personal trash. Results independently verified by a private Atlanta lab. Probability of random match, 1 in 10 trillion. Ballistic evidence, confirmed match. The Smith & Wesson Model 36.38 caliber, seized from Cole's home, bore a serial number, matching a gun issued to the sheriff's office in 1988. Firing pin and barrel rifling marks, matched 100% with 3 shell casings from the crime scene. Document forgery, motive cover-up. The July 1989 shift log was altered with ink. Under the blue ink, M. Cole was clearly visible. The suspect's personal notebook recorded a shift at Area 3, Rocky Face Ridge, matching the crime scene location. Additionally, a handwritten letter revealed a jealousy motive. If you don't choose me, don't let her show up in front of me again. Fiber and uniform correlation, a green fiber, from the victim's clothing, perfectly matched the 1988 Sheriff's Office uniform batch. Same fabric, dye lot, and weaving method. One of Cole's uniforms had a tear at the sleeve, matching the fiber's origin. When Moore finished, the room was silent for a few seconds. Sarah Kendall nodded and said, "We have a seamless chain of evidence from the crime scene to the suspect. Now it's time to build the prosecution structure." Assistant Prosecutor James Holloway opened a nearby file. Primary charge, he read, first-degree murder, under Georgia Criminal Code, Section May 1, 16, with aggravating factors: 1 intentional act, 2 dangerous weapon, 3 personal motive. He paused, glancing at Moore. "We have enough to prove all 3. Kendall nodded. "Good. But I want every detail backed by technical witnesses, not just lab results." A witness list was written on the whiteboard. Dr. Linda Perez, GBI DNA unit head, confirm extraction process, STR results, and independent verification. Lena Boyd, evidence collection technician, oversee chain of custody, from 1989 evidence vault to 2001 trash sample. Special Agent Elijah Moore, lead investigator, present evidence chain and reinvestigation process. Dr. Alan Ricks, ballistics expert, confirm gun and firing pin mark match. Robert Gaines and Deputy Harold Dixon, Cole's former colleagues, testify about her relationship with Michael Grant. Nels Whitfield, victim's father, representing family, confirm threats and suspicious signs before the murder. Kendall added her name at the bottom as chief prosecutor. She said slowly, "We're not just presenting numbers, we're telling a story of a woman killed, an investigation forgotten, and a truth that returned after 12 years. Moore handed over a small file. "This is the timeline for the indictment." He opened the first page. February 24, 1989, Claire Whitfield, killed at Rocky Face Ridge. 2/25, 7/1989. Initial investigation found no suspect. 1990, case moved to inactive status. 2001, GBI re-established, cold case and DNA unit, discovered biological sample. 6/2001, female DNA result did not match victim. 9/2001, suspect DNA from trash sample, fully matched. 10/2001, Marianne Cole arrested, weapons, uniforms, and documents seized. The timeline clarified the prolonged concealment element, often used to bypass statute of limitations in murder cases. There's no expiration on murder, Kendall said, and here, new evidence fully restarts the case. That afternoon, the team moved to a larger room to sign the official indictment. The first page, typed in classic font, read, "In the Superior Court of Whitfield County, State of Georgia, the State of Georgia, versus Marianne A. Cole, the grand jury charges that on or about February 24, 1989, the defendant, with malice aforethought, did unlawfully and intentionally cause the death of Claire Whitfield, by means of firearm, in violation of OCGA Section 1651, murder in the first degree." Sarah Kendall signed under District Attorney, then passed the pen to Elijah Moore, to sign the affidavit of investigation. Moore paused for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and signed, his signature bridging 1989 to 2001, from McCritty to himself. When the indictment was sealed, the court clerk stamped it, filed at 4:32 p.m. From that moment, Marianne Cole officially became the defendant in a first-degree murder case. The final step was an internal press briefing with media representatives. D.A. Kendall spoke briefly, her voice firm. "Thanks to scientific advancements and the persistence of investigators, Georgia can affirm today, no case is truly cold if the truth is preserved. Justice for Claire Whitfield is returning." As the meeting ended, Moore left the building, stepping into the late autumn sunlight. He looked at the red case file in his hand, recalling the night in 1989, when Sergeant McCritty wrote the final line in his report, "Likelihood of perpetrator knowing victim high." Now that speculation had become a legal conclusion. Before leaving, Kendall shook his hand, saying softly, "You've walked the whole road, Elijah, now it's our turn." Moore replied, "No ma'am, it's her turn, Claire's to speak." He turned and walked down the steps, his shoes echoing lightly on the stone. In the distance, the wind rustled through golden trees. After 12 years, the Claire Whitfield case was no longer a story of the past. It had become Georgia's official prosecution file, proof that truth can be delayed, but never erased. The trial opened on a cold, dry winter morning, at the Atlanta Superior Court, under the jurisdiction of the GBI filed and transferred case. Outside, local media lined up with a mix of old and new cameras. Inside, courtroom 3 was packed. Defendant Marianne A. Cole sat at the defense table in a gray blazer, hands clasped, her face calm to the point of coldness. At the prosecution table, Sarah Kendall organized a thick color-coded case file, while Elijah Moore sat behind as a key witness. On the wall, the Georgia state seal gleamed under the lights. As the judge entered, everyone stood, chairs scraping in unison like a choreographed beat. The prosecution began with Kendall reading the indictment briefly and clearly. Marianne Cole intentionally took Claire Whitfield's life with a firearm, on February 24, 1989. Kendall's opening statement avoided emotion, constructing a map of evidence in forensic sequence, crime scene biological sample preservation, STR retesting reference DNA match recovered evidence, gun uniform, 3D bullet trajectory simulation documents, showing tampered shift logs. "You will see," Kendall concluded, "each fact is a thread, woven together, they form a single rope leading to the defendant." The defense attorney opened with a familiar argument. The 12-year-old case had gaps, potential sample contamination, procedural errors. Their client, a former officer, was an easy target for bias. He emphasized reasonable doubt as their lifeline. Then the trial moved to evidence. The first witness, Dr. Linda Perez, GBI DNA unit head, explained the STR extraction and analysis, unsealing the bite mark swab envelope under camera, checking the glass tube's condition, extracting in a biosafety cabinet, running STR with 13 markers, double-checking independently, and cross-verifying with a private lab. On the large screen, 2 genetic charts appeared side by side, Whitfield DNA extract, 1989, and Ref-01, Cole, 2001, with matching marker peaks. Probability of random match, Perez said, is 1 in 10 trillion. The defense objected, targeting the chain of custody. "Are you sure the 1989 sample wasn't tampered with? Faded labels, old paper, long storage." Perez calmly replied, "The label was faded, but the red seal intact." Coroner Howard Gaines' signature matched the original file. 1989, GBI cold storage. 2001 unsealing logs, recorded every touch with signatures, dates and handlers, plus 2001 unsealing video. The judge allowed a short clip of the envelope opening. The courtroom fell silent. The contamination argument had no footing. The sample was dry, sealed, with no mold or unauthorized openings. Objection overruled. Next witness, Lena Boyd. She covered key logistics, retrieving the case #89-1472, metal box from shelf B4, noting seal conditions, creating new logs, collecting legally obtained trash reference samples, cup, straw, dual-signed receipts, transporting in a cold container, lab receipt timestamp 5:22 p.m., and assigning ref #01. The defense questioned public trash as a privacy violation. Kendall countered law allows collecting discarded items in public. The judge nodded, sustained for the state, ending the dispute. Then came ballistics expert Dr. Alan Ricks. He presented microscope images of firing pin marks and barrel rifling, overlaying patterns from the 1989 shell casings, with test shots from Cole's Smith & Wesson Model 36. The rifling motifs matched like a key in a lock. The defense suggested doubt. Model 36s are common. It could be another gun. Ricks calmly replied, "True, but firing pin marks are a gun's unique signature. Here they match at the microscopic level." Another piece fell into place. For documents, the prosecution called Elijah Moore. He recounted the reinvestigation reviewing shift logs, spotting M. Cole, overwritten with A. Jensen, UV light revealing the original ink, Cole's 1989 notebook noting, Area 3, Rocky Face Ridge, on the murder night, the jealousy letter, "If you don't choose me," the green fiber on the victim's clothing matching the 1988 uniform batch, and the 3D simulation, showing a shooter about 5'7", right-handed, matching Cole's profile. The defense attacked investigator bias. "Did you target her because she was a cop?" Moore replied succinctly, "We targeted DNA ballistics, documents, not titles." The courtroom scribbled notes. In the afternoon, context witnesses testified, Robert Bobby Gaines and Deputy Harold Dixon. Gaines described Cole's jealous temperament and past relationship with Michael Grant. Dixon recalled Cole sending him to another call that night, saying she'd check Area 3 without reporting back. The defense mocked 12-year-old memories, but Kendall was prepared. Shift logs, notebooks and location data filled memory gaps, dismantling the faulty recall argument. When Michael Grant testified, the courtroom held its breath. He admitted dating Marianne before marrying, trying to cut contact but not firmly, confirmed his wife mentioned a woman, following her at a parking lot. The defense pushed an affair motive, doubt, but no evidence supported it. The judge blocked speculative questions. On day 3, the defense focused on attacking chain of custody. They called a procedure expert to highlight faded labels, ink records, and long storage times. Kendall countered with a seamless document chain, 1989 logs, with Dr. Gaines' signature, annual seal intact storage tickets, 2001 unsealing logs, with video and photos, dual-signed trash sample receipts, private lab cross-verification. The judge ruled, chain of custody, sufficiently proven, defendant's objection overruled. The final nail, a 3D simulation played for the jury. It showed a close-range shooter, police-trained arm angle, loop and cinch restraint style, bullet trajectory from right to left, descending exactly matching the 1989 forensic report. The jury looked up, then down at their notes. No gaps remained. In the final defense argument, Cole's lawyer spoke of systemic error, suggesting a female officer was an easy scapegoat for public expectations. Kendall stepped up, stating 3 points: whose DNA was on the bite mark, whose gun produced the shell casings, who was at Area 3, but erased their name from the log. The answer, she closed, is one person. The courtroom fell silent, as the jury retired. 1 hour then 2, when they returned, the clerk stood to read the verdict, on the charge of first-degree murder under OCGA, Section 1651, the jury, by unanimous decision, finds guilty. A gasp echoed somewhere. Marianne Cole sat upright, eyes unfocused. The judge invited arguments on sentencing. The prosecution requested life without parole, citing intent, misuse of law enforcement skills, and prolonged concealment. The defense pleaded leniency for Cole's years of public service. The judge shook his head. Serving the public is not a license to betray justice. 3 firm gavel strikes, life imprisonment, no possibility of parole. As marshals cuffed Cole, she glanced at Elijah Moore. "You think you know everything," she whispered. Moore didn't respond. Outside, Atlanta's afternoon glowed. Sarah Kendall packed her files, shook Moore's hand. "We told the story in the language of evidence." He nodded, looking at the "In God We Trust" plaque behind the judge's bench, recalling the 1989 pencil note, "Preserve for future testing technology." 12 years later, the future had spoken. Today's verdict closed, not just a case, but an era of silence surrounding Claire Whitfield's death. In the hallway, golden light bathed the victim's portrait on its stand. No one spoke loudly, but all understood. Justice arrived late, but it arrived whole. After the trial concluded, the life imprisonment verdict without parole for Marianne Cole quickly became front-page news across every newspaper in Georgia and spread nationwide. The people of Dalton, a small town that had once tried to forget the 1989 case, now had to confront old memories, this time not with fear, but with a sense of relief mixed with astonishment. A female police officer, once clad in a uniform to protect the community, turned out to be the killer, brought to justice by decades-old biological evidence preserved for over a decade. In the days following the verdict, the GBI director held a special press conference at the Decatur headquarters. Standing before dozens of reporters, his voice low and resolute, he said, "The Claire Whitfield case proves that justice has no expiration date. Every piece of evidence, every detail, no matter how small, can become the voice of truth if we know how to listen." That statement was inscribed on a bronze plaque at the entrance to the GBI's evidence archive a year later, serving as a reminder for the new generation of investigators. But the aftershocks of the case didn't stop at words of praise. Immediately after Cole's conviction, Georgia reopened 12 similar cold cases, at least 4 of which involved suspects who were former public officials. The GBI established a dedicated investigative unit called the Integrity Task Force, composed of independent agents and forensic experts, not under the management of local units. Their goal was to ensure transparency when suspects were linked to law enforcement agencies. Elijah Moore, who had led the Whitfield investigation, was appointed as a technical advisor for the task force. No longer a field investigator, his experiences from that 12-year journey became official training material for the GBI. In an internal talk, he addressed hundreds of trainees. "What makes justice isn't speed, but persistence, even when time tries to erase the traces." Another significant change came when the GBI issued regulations for independent investigations when the suspect is a public official. Henceforth, any case involving law enforcement personnel would be transferred to a unit outside the county to avoid conflicts of interest. Unofficially dubbed the Cole Clause, this regulation was quickly referenced by neighboring states. It became a turning point in the operation of the local justice system, a commitment that police are not above the law. Concurrently, the Claire Whitfield case prompted a fundamental overhaul of Georgia's forensic evidence storage procedures. The GBI implemented a new standardized process for preserving biological samples, directly inspired by a pencil-written note from Dr. Howard Gaines in 1989. Preserve for future testing technology. The entire evidence storage system was upgraded. Each sample was assigned a barcode identifier, an electronic chain of custody log, automated temperature sensors, and tamper-proof seals. The storage facility was placed in an isolated area, accessible only via biometric codes. As a result, within 2 years of the improvements, Georgia became the state with the highest success rate for DNA reanalysis in the southeast United States. Samples once deemed useless were now considered the biological legacy of justice. Academically, the Claire Whitfield case quickly became a landmark forensic case study in Georgia. Criminal justice programs, from the University of Georgia to Emory, incorporated the case into their curricula. The article From Cold Evidence to Conviction, The Whitfield DNA Case, co-authored by Dr. Linda Perez and Elijah Moore, was published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences in 2003. becoming required reading for state-level DNA specialist training. In it they highlighted 3 critical factors for success. 1. A strict chain of custody, 2. Long-term stable evidence preservation, and 3. Independent investigation, when the suspect holds law enforcement authority. These 3 principles were later incorporated into the FBI's federal standards in 2005. For the victim's family, the verdict couldn't bring Claire back, but it closed 36 years of lingering between hope and despair. Nels Whitfield, Claire's father, who passed away before the trial, left a recorded message in his will, played at a memorial ceremony after the verdict. "I'm no longer angry, I just hope one day someone hears my daughter's voice through what she left behind. If that day comes, please tell her that her father has heard her." When the recording played in the hall, many shed tears, including Moore. He stood silently at the back, clutching a small case file, as if still unable to believe that his life's longest journey was complete. A year later, a simple memorial plaque was erected in Rocky Face Ridge Forest, where Claire was murdered. In memory of Claire Whitfield, her truth spoke through science. On the white marble base, the GBI director's words were engraved below: "No case is truly cold if justice is preserved in every piece of evidence." In the years that followed, many other cases were solved, thanks to next-generation DNA technology. Elijah Moore, now retired early, became an independent consultant for the Federal Institute of Justice Investigations. In his final interview before leaving the field, he said, "Claire taught us that technology is just a tool. What truly brings justice to life is people, those patient enough not to give up." 36 years after the crime, Georgia is now seen as a pioneer in using DNA and independent investigations to restore justice for victims in cold cases. From the small town of Dalton, where a woman vanished on her way home, the story transcended the scope of a single criminal case. It became a reminder that justice can be delayed, buried, even forgotten, but never lost. And each time the light of science shines into the dark corners of the past, the voices of the departed speak again, through tiny strands of DNA, reminding us that truth, though it may take 36 years to be heard, always finds a way to return. The Claire Whitfield case, a story spanning over 3 decades, from 1989 to when justice was served in the early 21st century, is not just a journey of investigating a crime, but a mirror reflecting the values American society strives to uphold: accountability, transparency, and faith in the justice system. In the story, we witness how advanced DNA technology, once a vague concept in 1989, became the key to solving the case when the GBI reanalyzed a bite mark sample preserved for future testing technology. This detail offers a profound lesson for America today: scientific progress only matters when paired with faith in truth and human perseverance. Elijah Moore and his team didn't give up, despite the case growing cold for 12 years, and that spirit is what every modern citizen needs in life: daring to confront mistakes, and refusing to close the file on what's not yet right. Furthermore, Georgia's post-case regulation mandating independent investigations, when suspects are public officials, reflects a timely lesson for American society. Power must always be checked by transparency. In an era when public trust is sometimes tested by cases of abuse of authority, Cole's story reminds us that justice only holds value when no one is above the law, not even those in uniform. Ultimately, the Whitfield case affirms that technology is merely a tool, and what keeps justice alive is the people who believe in its value. As Elijah Moore said at the story's end, "Technology helps us look back at the past, but only perseverance and integrity bring justice back." That's a lesson America, today and tomorrow, must remember. Thank you for following the resilient and just journey of solving the Claire Whitfield case, where truth was finally revealed after over 3 decades. Please hit subscribe to join us in exploring more cold cases where technology and perseverance continue to bring justice back to America.